Hi, we are in Parshat Va'era, which is the continuation of the exile in Egypt, but at the same time, it really is the beginning of the redemption. We see that Hashem is listening to the Jewish people's cries, to their prayers, to their sighs, to their screams, okay? And Hashem is turning the story around a little bit, and he's starting to bring Moshe as a redeemer to redeem the Jewish people, to take them out of Egypt. And Netivot Shalom talks about the difference or the uniqueness of this exile in that it was such an encompassing enslavement that the Jewish people were mentally and spiritually and psychologically and emotionally completely enveloped in this mentality, the Egyptian mentality, the Egyptian enslavement, to the point where it says in the Haggadah when we read on Pesach that if Hashem would not have come and swooped in and taken us out of that exile, to this day, our children and our children's children and our ancestors and our descendants would all have been still enslaved to Paro in Egypt. And Netivot Shalom is wondering, what do you mean? How would that possibly be? What does that even mean? So he talks about the idea of being completely mentally enslaved to a certain mentality, a certain way of thinking, a certain a distance from Hashem, and this feeling of not being connected to Hashem at all, to the point where we don't have any identity. We don't have any ability to think for ourselves. And he says that this was the most difficult exile of all. And he says, Hagalut hakasha biyoter va'avadum ve'inu otam, that this torment, this slavery, this labor was baguf ubanefesh. It was body and soul. Ve'ruach uneshama, like the spirit and everything about us, our soul, our essence, was all completely encompassed into this other, assimilated into the culture of Egypt. And we needed Hashem to kind of really take us out of it. And he says specifically that this is what we are experiencing, or what basically is the root of all exile, is the inability to think for yourself, the inability to have an identity, to feel that you're close to Hashem. And he says that when you do feel that distance, you are not able to. This is called an exile, no matter what. Even if you have a good life, or even if you have like a good physical existence, and you have money, and you have food, and you have clothing, but if you are feeling this distance from Hashem, you're feeling like you have no thought process, you have no identity, you have no real clarity on life and on your connection with Hashem, and you don't feel Hashem's love for you, that is the root of all of exile. So he says here that when you are, each and every person, we have this idea of galut haklal and galut haprat. We have this concept of an exile of the entire Jewish people, but you also have galut haprat, which is our individual exile. And this is what he's saying. Today, in this day and age, when you feel that you are disconnected from Hashem, if you feel any kind of sadness, any kind of bitterness, any kind of confusion, sadness, depression, anxiety, worry, darkness in your life, it comes from the fact that you are basically in exile. Your da'at, your ability to think clearly, you're having this spiritual connection to Hashem, is in exile. And he says exactly like this. I'll read it to you for a second because he says it in a nice way. Hamakor lezeh. Sometimes we don't know, he's saying, shehu meshu'abad lara. We are basically enslaved to the, I wouldn't say evil, but I would say to our yetzer hara, to this confusion, to this distance, to the side of us that's trying to take us away from Hashem. And vehu ha'atzvut ba'adam, sheleitim בעצם אינו יודע על מה הוא עצוב. והמקור לזה שהוא משועבד ליצר הרע. Sometimes we don't know why we're sad. There's this basic sadness going on. There's this basic And the reason is that we really are enslaved. We are in an exile, and the exile is to our own yetzer hara, to that feeling inside of us that we just want to take the easy way out, that we just want to not push ourselves, to not try, to not put in the effort into the relationship with Hashem. And he says, and the opposite is also true. V'chein lahefech, כשיהודי שמח, if you're happy, המקור לזה הוא שיצא משעבוד להשם יתברך, הוא מרגיש קרוב אליו יתברך, ואז כלום חסר בבית המלך. That sometimes we're happy and we don't really even know why. Hey, we just kind of feel good now. And that also comes from the fact that you have come out of exile to an extent. And you are now closer to Hashem. And you feel, klum chaser beveit hamelech. Is there anything missing if you're in the house of the king? And what that means is if you feel that you're in the house of the king, you have a relationship with Hashem, that's really all that matters. And that is, then you're not missing anything else. And that is the source of all happiness. And he says at the end that really this is what we have to pray for. This is what we have to daven for, because in the end of the day, it really is almost impossible to experience that closeness to Hashem on one hand, because we are finite and Hashem is infinite. So really, theoretically, it's impossible to reach that closeness, because like, how can we? We're not transcendent. We're not really beings that are infinite or that can reach the infinite. So how can that even be? So he says you have to pray about that. You have to daven about that. And it totally you have to like ask Hashem, please help me get out of this exile, this confusion, this darkness that I feel that I am connected somehow to this Yetzer Hara, or I'm not able to really see you, Hashem. I'm not really able to feel you. And I need to daven about that. And we don't think that we need to pray about that. And it's amazing how it connects with what I was learning today with my friends when we were talking about prayer. There's this concept of prayer that is called, one of the names for prayer is itur. And it comes actually from Bereshit, where it says, Vaye'ater Yitzchak laHashem lenochach ishto. Yitzchak and Rivka were praying to God to enable them to have a child, because Rivka was infertile. She was barren, as were 3 out of the 4 matriarchs, just by the way. So she was barren. She wasn't able to have children. And in fact, she didn't even have a uterus, apparently. So it was completely unnatural for her to conceive, because she didn't have a uterus. So it had to be a very, very intense kind of prayer. And it says the word vaye'ater. So itur is the kind of prayer, says Rav Shimshon Pinkus, that we're learning in She'arim B'Tfilah, in the Gates of Prayer. It is the kind of prayer that is like constant nudging Hashem, like going over and over and over constantly, the same thing. Now, I don't know about you, but when your kid is nudging you nonstop, it's a little bit annoying, and sometimes you're like, get out of my face already. But that is because we are human and we just don't like when people nudge us, especially because we're not even clear. We don't know for sure if we want to give them what they want, and they're making us crazy and they're making us annoyed. But with Hashem, there's no such thing, and Hashem only wants a relationship with us. So he actually loves it when we keep going at it. And itur comes from the root of atar, which is a rake or a shovel that you actually have to plow the ground with. And in Hebrew, it's funny because, so it's like a digging, it's like a shovel that you dig with. And in Hebrew, there's this concept when you say to somebody, Ata chofer li, you're digging, you're just digging, you're so annoying, you're digging. Ata chofer li, like my son Yehuda is always trying to look for ways to be independent, and he doesn't want me to keep telling him what to do. At choferet, ima at choferet. And lots of times it's the mother who is digging, because like she tries to find out information, or she's worried, or she wants to know the details, so she keeps asking and asking. So that is a word in Hebrew which is also associated with this form of tefillah, which means digging and digging and digging. And the Rav Shimshon Pinkus says that the reason why you need to dig so much, especially with prayer, is that really there is something very unnatural about us connecting to Hashem. He says specifically, if you have something unnatural going on in your life, like it's a real miracle almost that you're asking for. So you need to dig, because you need to create a vessel for that miracle to happen, or for that unnatural thing to happen. Like you need to create a vessel. So it's actually digging and digging. And the digging happens through prayer, through connecting to Hashem. Because the more you ask Hashem, even though you think you're making him crazy, you're not. You're making yourself a little bit crazy, but in a good way, meaning you make yourself understand better what you're trying to say, and you become a kli, you become a vessel for that infinite aspect of Hashem and that relationship. So after all that digging in your own soul, in your own self, in your own inner connection to Hashem, then you become the kli that is worthy of getting that love of Hashem, which is really an infinite, amazing miracle that we can have a relationship with Hashem. So we have to pray for it. We have to dig to create in ourselves that vessel. We have to dig to ask Hashem over and over again. And then we become a different person. We become a person who is ani tefillah, as it said, as David HaMelech says in Tehillim. I become a prayer. I am a prayer person. I am a davener, And when one of the ladies were saying that, that's how we've been feeling after these 2 years, of this war and with what's going on, among the Jewish people today. It almost seems impossible that certain things are going to change. But this idea of digging or of constantly saying over and over and over again and really remembering that we have to ask Hashem for everything, and He wants to hear from us, and He wants us to pray about things that are even unnatural because He wants to give it to us and He wants it to change. He wants things to change. So I'm just thinking, if we see some situation in the Jewish people that just seems untenable and impossible, it's a really worthy idea to pray and pray and pray, and specifically use this kind of digging aspect, which is like nudging, which is saying over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter if you think that it's not going to work. Don't worry about it working. Just keep asking, and Hashem will do the rest of the work. Have a good Shabbos.